apprenticeship training in Canada. It collects best practices and promising practices and shares them broadly with the community, with the goal of supporting a highly skilled, productive, and inclusive skilled trades workforce. So over the past year, we've been working with our partners, CCRW and Skill Plan, on some really exciting work that is helping apprentices with their learning and improving apprentice outcomes. So I'm really happy to have Michelle and Teresa with me here today. They're going to share some great information with you about some really exciting initiatives that they have been working on. But first, I would just like to do the land acknowledgement on behalf of CAF. In keeping with Indigenous protocol and building respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, it is customary to acknowledge the traditional territory or ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. We are meeting virtually, so I would like to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land and waters where each of us attends the meeting this afternoon. CAF acknowledges that the Indigenous landscape in Canada is broad and encompasses many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and we respect and affirm the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. And we would like to ask you what your intentions are to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this territorial acknowledgement. So at this point, I would like to invite Michelle Wilson on behalf of CCRW to share with us some insights she gathered from a project that she's been working on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for that land acknowledgement. Much appreciated. Okay, well, hello, and thank you again for joining this webinar. I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Michelle Wilson. I use she, her pronouns. A brief visual description. I am a white woman in her mid-30s with long straight brown hair and brown eyes. I am wearing some makeup today, and I am wearing brown and beige over-the-ear headphones, and I'm also wearing a high neck green top with a long sleeve black cardigan over it. I am an evaluation specialist at CCRW, which really means I get to explore the impact of our services, which I love, and I will be sharing with you today. I'm going to skip over the agenda just for time, but I'll start by sharing a little bit about CCRW for those who aren't familiar with CCRW or the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work. It is a national nonprofit that works to promote and support meaningful and equitable employment for persons with disabilities. Today, I wanted to share a bit about the services we offered specifically to folks with disabilities in the trades. So from 2022 to 2025, we ran Accessibility First, which was a nationwide government-funded initiative to remove barriers for apprentices with disabilities, including those with learning disabilities. We provided support for apprentices at every stage, so from entry into the trades through training and to getting Red Seal certification. Beyond direct supports for apprentices, we also help shift the sector towards inclusion by offering tools, training, and strategies to promote inclusive hiring, onboarding, and retention. This was made possible through strong partnerships with unions, employers, and nonprofits like CAF. Together, we built a more inclusive trades ecosystem and boosted disability confidence across the sector. So through this initiative, we supported 233 candidates on their apprenticeship journey. And interesting to note that half of the candidates had learning disabilities. I'm going to jump to the next slide quickly to show you more of a breakdown of the disability types of the apprentices that we supported. So we can see here that half of the candidates that we supported had learning disabilities, and this was followed by mental health at 26%. So those were the most represented disability types across the apprentices that we supported, though you can also see that many other disability types were represented here. All of the apprentices that we supported were persons with disabilities, and many had other intersecting identities, which also meant that their needs were intersectional as well. When we talk about supporting apprentices with disabilities, it's really important to remember that apprentices have more than just one identity. People, we are complex. They're not just an apprentice. or a person with disability. They can also be parents, immigrants, Indigenous, 2S LGBTQIA+, and all of these identities overlapped and intersect. And that intersection shapes how someone might experience the world. And that can include their work on a job site and in their educational blocks in the trades. When we support apprentices, it's not enough to focus only on disability-related needs. We have to look at the whole person and understand the full range of barriers that they might be facing. One of the major takeaways we had from FIRST was gaining a real understanding of the barriers or the challenges that apprentices with disabilities were facing in the trades and in getting their Red Seal certification. When apprentices came in, CCRW's accessibility consultants would work closely with them to understand the barriers that were arising for each apprentice. And we were able to capture this data and really build a more in-depth understanding of the barriers that apprentices were facing. Now, before I share what we learned, I want to hear from you all. Just in the chat, if you can post, a word or two, what do you think some of the biggest barriers apprentices with disabilities in the trades might be facing? I will read out responses. I see stigma. I see acceptance. Stigma's popping up a lot. Thank you for sharing math, for sure. A lack of support and understanding, access, travel, lack of knowledge and support, unsure of where to get support, not knowing where to get support, peer mentorship, fast-paced courses, accommodations, ableism, ignorance of instructors at college, bullying. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'll share a bit from our own findings. I'm seeing success in technical training as well, lack of employer support, racism, test anxiety, they're all coming in. So I will share some of our findings. And again, thank you all for sharing. So as we can see from this word cloud of our results here, apprentices face a wide variety of barriers, a lot that were mentioned in the chat already. So we can see needing breaks, Red Seal certification costs, the Red Seal certification exams. I'm going to dive in a bit more into the top 3 barriers that were reported by apprentices that we supported. So the most prominent barrier that we heard from apprentices was barriers related to mental health, with over 100 individuals reporting mental health related barriers. Anxiety was the most common issue, which was often intensified by academic pressures, environmental changes, or personal trauma. Stress was also prevalent, especially around testing and returning to trades post-pandemic. Many of the apprentices experienced overlapping conditions, so anxiety, stress, and depression, and often had that compounded by financial hardship. Some experienced situational stressors like having to leave family for school to complete their educational blocks, or dealing with injuries. And these findings around mental health really underscore the need for robust mental health supports systems in the apprenticeship program. The second most prominent barrier that apprentices reported to us were school or study related barriers. And this was really nearly as widespread as mental health related barriers, again, with over 100 apprentices reporting them. Barriers related specifically to learning disabilities were the most frequently cited issues. Many apprentices also struggled with exam preparation and anxiety, particularly around the Red Seal exam and block exams. And a lack of accommodation, so not having accessible technology, tutoring, or study setups really intensified some of those barriers. Focus and retention were also additional concerns for apprentices, with them reporting difficulty concentrating in class or retaining the study materials. So these findings really highlight the importance of inclusive, well-supported learning environments in trades education. Over 80 apprentices reported financial barriers, which is the third most prominent, as many juggled debts, living costs, and study expenses while trying to advance their careers. School costs were a major theme. Apprentices struggled with tuition and mandatory supplies like books and tools, as well as overall program fees that were often compounded by other debts that strained their ability to attend classes or study effectively. Work gear expenses also posed a challenge. Some candidates simply couldn't afford essential tools or protective wear. These apprentices reported that they needed to keep their paying jobs, which sometimes meant skipping study days to earn income. So how do we address these barriers? Well, some of the barriers are complex and require a bit more of a zoomed out lens. When we look at barriers like stigma, that was mentioned a lot in the chat, we had to work directly with employers and partners, and we did this in a few key ways. So the first was through language that we used. Through this project, our accessibility consultants often encountered hesitation when talking about disability and accommodations with employers and even sometimes with apprentices. A lot of this hesitation stemmed from misunderstanding and misconceptions about both of these terms. So sometimes people think that disability means someone is less capable. And sometimes people think accommodations are unfair advantages or forms of special treatment. Many people didn't believe that people with disabilities worked or could work in the trades. And as a result, they just assumed that CCRW supports were not relevant to them or their sector. We know that this isn't true. So our team reframed these conversations using terms like barriers to talk about disability. At CCRW, we understand disability through the social model of disability, which says that people aren't disabled by their bodies or minds, but rather by the barriers that are around them in the world. So for example, someone might have a characteristic like blindness, but that doesn't mean they're automatically disabled. What makes life harder are the barriers in society. So things like buildings without braille signs or websites that don't have screen readers. These are the barriers that create the disability. The term accommodation was also reframed as a productivity support, which helped folks to see that supports aren't special treatments. Rather, supports can help people do their best at work. And this kind of reframing isn't about avoiding words like disability or accommodation, but it's more about meeting people where they're at to invite some openness and conversation about disability and inclusion. We also provided tools and resources like our Disability Confidence Toolkit that outlines some really practical action items for employers to boost inclusion in the workplace at all stages. So I'll jump to a quick slide that shows all the domains the toolkit covers. As you can see here, it's built around 10 key areas that are essential to becoming a truly disability confident organization. Users are able to navigate through the toolkit as needed. So if you're wanting to look specifically at inclusive onboarding, for example, you can just jump directly to that area to learn more about how to apply those things in your workplace or organization. Yes, any employer can access or use the toolkit. I'm just seeing a question in the chat saying, is the toolkit online for any employer to use? Most certainly it is. Ultimately, all of the use of language, the tools and the resources, they all come together to increase disability confidence, which is a huge step in addressing barriers. Having that confidence to employ and work with people with disabilities and to provide the needed supports and accommodations is really critical in advancing inclusion in the trades. Now, there are some more practical ways that we supported apprentices by providing accommodations or productivity supports that help them be able to bring their best selves to work. We provided nearly 600 accommodations to apprentices, and we were able to analyze those accommodations to understand what the most popular ones for apprentices were for overall, and specifically for those with learning disabilities. So once again, I want to turn things over to the group. And thank you. I see the Disability Confidence Toolkit has been shared in the chat. Wonderful. But I want to turn things over to the group and ask, what type of accommodations do you think we saw the most across apprentices? And what about apprentices with learning disabilities? Time extensions, yeah. Just jumping to the bottom of the chat here. Time, yeah, extra time on exams. More time for tests, readers. Flexible scheduling, private rooms, transportation, memory aids, translation, help with anxiety. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing again in the chat. It's great to see breaks and access to moving. In school, one-to-one support, taking time to listen to each individual of support. So I'm going to share a little bit of our own findings. Thank you guys for sharing in the chat. So for our candidates with learning disabilities, by far the largest category of accommodation was school supports, specifically technology and hardware, such as e-reader pens and laptops. They were provided 75 times to nearly 60 candidates, which means that over half of the apprentices that we supported with learning disabilities required this type of support. So this was a big one. And 1/3 of candidates who received this type of accommodation used e-reader pens, which is an extremely helpful tool apprentices use and one of our most popular. Shortly, I'll jump to a quick slide of it just so you can see how awesome and easy to use this transformative piece of tech is. But the next most common accommodation types were both job site productivity supports. So the first being work apparel and safety gear. So those can be things like work boots and lightweight helmets. The next most prominent support type was tools and supplies. So things like electronic screwdrivers, digital tape measures, tool carts. And actually not on this slide, but not far behind these three categories was also the need for ergonomic tools and supplies. So ergonomic work belts, tools, foldable saws, or portable toolboxes. A lot of these accommodations make a lot of sense when you think about finances being one of the main barriers to working and staying in the trades that we heard from our apprentices. Yes, these are the top accommodations specifically for candidates with learning disabilities, but they are also the top 3 accommodation types across all candidates, just in a slightly different order, where tools and supplies jumps to the first most prominent, school supplies is the second, and work apparel and safety gear is the third. So very similar, but just a slightly different order. I'm going to share this quick video that will give an overview of the e-reader pen, as this was a tool that definitely piqued a lot of interest and was often used. Awesome. So again, just a really great tool. Sometimes just having the e-reader pen read the text aloud from notes or from textbooks was hugely helpful in folks processing the information on the page, but it has things like the voice recorder. You can record voice notes in class, have it translate or define words for you. So really a great tool there and very popular. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, but what is the cost of all of this? The perceived cost, so what employers think accommodations will cost, is a major barrier for people getting accommodations. Legally, employers have to provide reasonable accommodations, but a lot of employers just assume that accommodations are just so out of reach or are more of a nuisance and an expense than it is worth, which isn't true. So let's take a look at the average cost of each of these accommodation types that we provided to apprentices. For tech and hardware related school supports, we're looking at $479, an average cost of $479. For work apparel and safety gear, that comes in at an average of $216. And for tools and supplies, an average of $252. So these averages are all less than $500 and most under $300. These are accommodations and productivity supports that can significantly impact somebody's ability to do work and not only work well, but also sustain their working position. So think about a digital tape measure, for example, for someone who struggles with reading numbers. This can result in less errors on their part and can also improve their workflow, as they're not getting caught up in having to triple check their measurements and the numbers they've recorded, or the labor of having to fix errors that came from misrecorded numbers. It can also be the difference between someone passing their Red Seal certification or not. So we're not breaking the bank here for companies to be providing these accommodations, but also remember that financial barriers were one of the top 3 barriers that apprentices expressed to us. So while it might not break the bank for employers, it may be a lot for a single person to provide for themselves. I want to share quickly some of the impacts from Accessibility First initiative. Through it, we supported 233 apprentices and provided nearly 600 accommodations. We supported 26 apprentices that were able to complete their Red Seal certification, and we helped increase the labor market participation in the skilled trades by providing the supports needed for apprentices with disabilities to get into and, importantly, stay and advance in the trades. that's the end of the presentation here. I just want to put a quick plug. We do have our annual trends report that will be coming out and published by the research team at CCRW. I'm part of the research team. And this year we do have an article dedicated to accessibility in the trades. So please do stay tuned for that over the upcoming months. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And if you have a question for Michelle, feel free to put it in the chat. One person is asking, Michelle, do you know the range and the cost for the accommodations? So you gave some specific examples in the slide, but did you find there was a range of costs?
Certainly there was a range, and some of them were services that we provided through our sister organization, ANOVA, and they provided really broad-ranged accessibility assessments, and those were the highest cost. Those ones were around $2,000, but those were covered by our supports. And for average costs, we ranged from, let me take a look here. So by category, starting at 185, and then it did go up to that 2,000, but that was for a specific service. Sometimes around 700 for specific training, so fall protection training, safety training, rope access courses. We had some that were, some tutoring and supports were a little bit more on the high end, but then we have ergonomic tool supplies that are more around $177, so less than $200. Red Seal certification exam support, so exam fees and things like that were under $200. So there is quite a range. And then certainly there's other wraparound supports that were provided, things like childcare supports,
Right.
transportation supports, things like that.
So it would be hard to come up with an average cost because everybody's supports were so customized. So
they
one
were very
apprentice,
customized. Yeah, exactly.
It's not still available, correct? The program has ended?
The program has ended. There's still job seeker support through CCRW. It's not necessarily specific to the trades as it was. So
Right.
things like tuition costs and things like that might not be able to be covered, but there is still employment support. So if you need, support with building your confidence or upskilling, or maybe things, supports to help in other ways or on the job site, we can help with that.
That's great. And out of the 233 participants, they weren't all Red Seal candidates, right? They were at different levels. Like some might have been level 1, some might have been pre-apprentices, some might have been non-certified tradespeople.
Absolutely. So we had apprentices that were at the very beginning of their journey. That we had apprentices that had gone through all of their coursework and all of their worksite hours and were just looking to get Red Seal certified. And then some folks that were in between, because it is a very long process for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Now I'd like to pass it over to Teresa from Skill Plan.
Thank you, Emily. And Michelle, what a great presentation and such a positive and encouraging project that you worked on. I know that Skill Plan has worked with CCRW, and many of the folks who are participating in this webinar today. So hello to everybody, and thank you so much for your support during the project that Skill Plan was running together with SRDC. So welcome to the second part of the webinar. Today, I'm just going to share my screen. I'm Teresa Phillips. I'm from Skill Plan, and I'm joined by Naomi Fraser from the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, who was our partner in the research part of this project. And we'd like to share our project supporting pre-apprentices and apprentices with learning differences. This was a federal project that we ran from 2021 to 2024, and we had some excellent responses and results that Naomi would share. So a little bit about Skill Plan, because everybody may not know about us. We're an organization based in Burnaby, BC. We're a nonprofit that is part of Canada's building trades. And for over 30 years, we've been working with building trades unions, their affiliated contractors and training providers, as well as Indigenous community providers in BC and across the country. We develop products and tools and provide services to help workers get into the trade and then be successful in technical training and also on the job. So, we just want people to be more productive and safe on the job. I'd just like to acknowledge that Skill Plan's office is in Burnaby, BC, and we're located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So in our session today, we're just going to share what we learned in the Learning Differences project and how that can help you improve support of apprentices in your own training context. I'm going to share the tools and resources that we developed as part of this, this project for trainers and the support model that worked best for our learners. Naomi with the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation will be sharing exciting research findings, and will leave you with some actionable steps to support apprenticeship training in your organization. Our overall project goals and objectives were to help meet that labor shortage that we're seeing in the skilled trades workforce. It's well documented. The construction industry alone will lose almost a quarter of the skilled workers to retirement. So as part of our work to support learning challenges, Skill Plan was pleased to partner with the federal government and the research team at SRDC to expand our offerings and move into the learning disabilities and differences space. So the same kind of clients that Michelle's team at CCRW is seeing as well, except our focus was more on those with learning differences specifically and not so much physical disabilities. So we decided we needed a more structured, consistent, and learner-centered approach to identify and support apprentices with learning disabilities and differences for the construction industry. And we need that to effectively build a sustainable and equitable workforce. So how do we make apprenticeship possible and achievable goal for those who've struggled in the K-12 school system? And that's where this project came in, to provide targeted supports to learners and to training providers to facilitate self-discovery and enable self-advocacy. So we worked in partnership with trainers and industry experts across Canada, developed training tools and resources to support pre-apprentices and apprentices, trainers, and employers across all the skilled trades. So here's some of our project outputs. We needed to investigate learning differences and disability support models that are existing across Canada, and integrate learning differences screening tools so that we could identify and support pre-apprentices and apprentices with their learning needs. We wanted to expand and enhance the use of best practices in Skills for Success and learning disability instruction, program design, and professional development in trades training and apprenticeship pathways. And we recognize that those who are instructing trades in schools across Canada, they typically do not have that kind of training. So we really wanted to make sure that we develop some tools that can help them and to help the learners themselves. And of course, we love data. So an important part of this project was to evaluate the integration of the various project tools and resources, the assessments, and the tutoring supports for at-risk pre-apprentices and apprentices, and to inform and contribute to the model on a larger scale. And as I said before, the project really focused on what could be done to support both learners and instructors within training and assessment. So just a little bit of definition here. I've used two different terms, learning disabilities and learning differences. And we just want to focus that learning disabilities are specific differences in individuals' ability to perceive and process information that negatively impact the learning of foundational academic skills in reading, writing, or mathematics. So hence the dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And they're neurodevelopmental disorders, a group of conditions that have their onset in childhood and can vary over time. As part of SRDC's needs analysis conducted at the project start, it was identified that a formal diagnosis of learning disabilities created really large barriers to access support for those in technical training. There were concerns of disclosure, even awareness of people having learning disabilities, fear of stigma, as was mentioned before, and aspects of confidentiality and also timing with respect to block training. So somebody who's entering a 6-week trades training program doesn't have time to wait for 3 months for psych ed. So we determined to offer other ways to support those learners in the absence of a formal diagnosis. Our model was predicated on a non-differentiated approach, using universal supports to flip that existing model on its head and support everyone, including those who don't have official diagnoses. And just to clarify, our project was a non-medical model. We are not diagnosing learning disabilities. So we use the term learning differences, which is a broader term to signify challenges in reading, writing, and math, and focus, where learners may not have a specific diagnosis, or they might prefer not to use the term given the stigma associated with learning disabilities that focuses on weakness of the learner and isolates them from others. So we use LD, the abbreviation, as a blanket term to include both types of learners. And our tools can help identify potential learning differences so both trainers and learners know what supports may be helpful to them. And implementation of the assessments and tools helped learners reflect on their own learning journey. Many had not even connected those accommodations that they received in the K-12 system with learning differences or disabilities. They only knew they got extra time to write tests or got extra help after class or left the class to work with a tutor. But all of those interventions suggest that there was some learning complexity which required additional support. So we want to make sure that we can support them in some way in their apprenticeship journey as well. So I'd like to share the support model that we created. It was created with flexibility in mind to help the diversity of training models in the construction trades across Canada. As we know, success looks different for every learner. Training has different lengths. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So we wanted to target supports for learners and training providers to facilitate self-discovery and self-advocacy. Skill Plan took an iterative approach to developing and streamlining the intervention model. As we progressed through our deliveries, we adapted the model and tools based on lessons that we learned from the learners themselves and instructors in technical training and the organizations that we supported. So we just to make it brief, we sought feedback from subject matter experts in the LD space to review the model and supporting tools, and worked very collaboratively with our partner organizations to learn what do they need. And the key components of the model included professional development, intake tools, which included a pre and post assessment, accommodations, and support. So a little bit about that. We initiated professional development for our team of Skill Plan instructors, tutors, and with a small group of partner organizations participating in the pilot phase. This training served as the foundation to the model. So it provided a deeper understanding of LD, including how to provide individualized and accommodated instruction, how to identify a potential learning difference or disability, and the types of accommodations that one can provide, and how to plan support strategies using the universal design for learning and how to support learners with self-advocacy. So all of these were grounded in the principles of universal design for learning. And we, knowing that the trades training instructors don't have typically very much training in this, we created guides so that instructors could conduct intake and exit interviews in a confidential and encouraging manner. Exit interviews, how to review assessment results to identify potential learning differences, and how to administer the tools provided. We also created an accommodation fact sheet and provided a list of guiding questions for tutors as well. And I'm happy to share those resources with you and your teams. And later I'll share a slide of how you can access those tools for free. The intake tools that we developed were designed to facilitate a safe environment, reduce barriers to disclosure, and help uncover potential learning complexities and what appropriate supports might work for that. So we have a learning disabilities intake questionnaire with a consent form, the midpoint check-ins for the instructor to use with the learner, instructor summary documents, classroom accommodations, and so on. And please note that we created these tools with adaptability in mind, because not all tools need to be used. It really depends on how much time you have with your learners. If you have a long program, like 8 weeks or something, you can do the full meal deal. But if you're only working with them for a short period of time, 2 weeks or 4 weeks, maybe you can just pick and choose and determine what are the best tools for your organization to use. And the last main component is the accommodations and supports. These included recommendations to support the learner, including instructional, environmental, assessment, and task-related accommodations. As I mentioned earlier, we had frequent check-ins, especially when we had a longer period of time with our learners, and it allowed us to create a strong foundation so the learner felt comfortable talking to us. We wanted to remove stigma and normalize help seeking for everyone, and taking responsibility for their own learning. They're adults, so we wanted to encourage that. We also provided tutoring for those who needed or requested it. So just to give you an example of how this all worked and how we adapted the implementation through our tutoring stream. So we supported some of the CCRW participants. I saw some folks from Skilled Trade BC. So we also have worked with those apprentices and pre-apprentices. So our tutoring participants complete a very basic intake form in which they could indicate that they had learning differences or executive functioning challenges. And we used general wording on that form so that it was inclusive without a psych ed diagnosis. We've tried to keep it supportive to reduce stigma and allow for self-disclosure. And if they indicated that they did have a learning difference or they didn't know, then we would use our intake questionnaire with them and dig a little bit into their learning history. So we connected with them and used the intake questionnaire, one of the tools that we developed. And we gathered information about their learning history, challenges, and some suggestions of supportive accommodations. Like, do you think this would help you in your learning or on the job? In some of our programs, we used a benchmark assessment, not so much for the tutoring folks because of time limitations. They usually were working towards an exam date, so we didn't want to slow them down with another assessment. But we did have benchmark assessments that were used, that were implemented using a contextualized assessment for their trade. And SkillPlan is happy to support your organization. We do have many contextualized trades assessments. And if this is something that you'd be interested in, I'll be sharing my contact info at the end and also in the chat. If they did write an assessment, we followed up with a review using a guide for reviewing assessment results, one of our tools, and we looked for patterns that would suggest learning differences or alternately just skill gaps, as well as the intake questionnaire, so we could get a good reference of what the learner might need. Then we continued with consented sharing of information with the tutor to inform them what we've learned, how to target for either those foundational skill gaps or whether a learning complexity is at play, so that they can implement and stress certain universal design for learning and specific strategies. Our tutors were also trained with one of the tools that was developed, the professional development, so that the tutor could learn to recognize and build capacity to help that apprentice and help them self-advocate for support in training, exams, and on the job site. And Naomi will now join us and tell you about the evaluation highlights. Naomi, just let me know when to change the slide.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. All right, so I'll just be super quick, giving you some very high-level evaluation highlights. So we were looking at 3 things in this support model: the design and delivery, so asking what's effective about this approach, and also what does it take to deliver it if it's going beyond skill plan to its partners. We looked at those features. We also looked at instructors, tutors, and stakeholders. So as the professional development was also rolled out nationally, we wanted to understand how instructors and tutors benefited from the professional development training and what the value was to other trades partners and stakeholders. So these included other unions, other directors of training, and also trades authorities and community partners as well. And then, of course, a key part of our evaluation was looking at how pre-apprentices and apprentices actually benefited, and those concrete outcomes that Teresa was talking about, both in terms of their self-awareness, their ability to self-advocate for how they learned best, and also concretely, did they gain the necessary skills to continue in their apprenticeship journey. So it was a very comprehensive evaluation. It was over 10 different surveys. I think over 100 instructors and tutors we surveyed. Close to 1,500 apprentices and pre-apprentices went through the model over the years. So we surveyed them too and had to accommodate for those different delivery models as well. And then we, to complement that kind of hard data, we also conducted over 50 interviews, about 10 focus groups. So it was a real 360. And right now I'm just giving you the very high-level highlights for each of these questions that we looked at. So we can start, Teresa, if you want to move on to design and delivery. Here are just 2 quotes from different focus groups. And the 2 things that stand out in Skill Plan's delivery model that we found was, first of all, having that subject matter expertise, not just in disability and accessibility, but also critically that industry and construction trades expertise. So this was a really contextualized support model. We found, it's a different teaching environment when you're in technical training that Skill Plan has to account for. You have to account for, certain accommodations that work for, say, a desk job or reading a textbook are not going to work in a noisy construction site. So having that dual expertise of construction trades, but also understanding learning differences and disabilities was really critical to the success. And then, as Teresa said, this isn't a differentiated model where you have to identify with having a learning difference or disability. It was a flexible model delivered to all sorts of learners in a universal design for learning grounded context. And what we found here was that universal design approach was really, really effective, worked across the board, centering learners, centering flexibility, made it very successful in terms of a very unique design and delivery. So I'll move on just quickly to highlight some of the instructor and tutor outcomes. So we looked at, instructors and tutors' basic knowledge and awareness of learning differences and disabilities going into the professional development, and then coming out of the professional development, not just in terms of what they learned, but do they feel like they gained new skills in terms of being able to change their instruction? And do they feel like they had the confidence to adapt instruction? So you'll see that across measures overall, that 87% agreed they after completing professional development, had that very high level of knowledge across measures, and those differ when we looked at each of the specific learning disabilities and differences. 69% agreed they had the skills to accommodate those in the classroom. And then very high levels of agreement, 97% and 95% respectively, saying they felt they had learned things in terms of their ability to adapt instruction for learning disabilities and differences, and they felt now prepared to support those learners in the classroom. So very, very high success rates there. And then when we look at pre-apprentices and apprentices, I'll spend a bit of time here first in terms of the profile. So again, because we're looking at all apprentices, we wanted to understand, well, who's showing up in the classroom who may have a learning disability or a difference. They might not feel necessarily that they want to disclose it. Disclosure is such a personal issue. And we learned throughout this project that apprentices may not feel that they're in an environment where they can say they have a learning disability or difference. But nonetheless, I think the key takeaway on this slide is if you think you're not, if you're in an instruction environment, if you think there's no one with a disability in your classroom, you're wrong. You're working with people who have learning disabilities and differences. You just might not know it. So across all of these surveys, of all of the apprentices we surveyed, 71% reported a learning disability or difference. And so the other thing with learning disabilities and differences, as Teresa said, we're not diagnosing anyone, we're asking them to self-identify, but we do know from the research and literature that learning differences often co-occur with other types of conditions that can impact learning. So that might be mental health and how that might be a challenge. It also might be an attention conditions such as ADHD. So you'll see on the other side of the screen that across the measures where we assessed do you have something that might interfere with your learning? 55% reported challenges across more than one category. So they might be experiencing a specific learning challenge with reading or math, but that they were also experiencing other challenges related to their mental health or attention as well. So the support model accounted for all of these. And then when we looked at outcomes, if we go to the next slide, these are just some high-level highlights. So we wanted to understand self-awareness in terms of, well, what do apprentices get out of understanding their own learning strengths and needs, and recognizing how they can feel supported and where supports are beneficial. So we know that apprentices are learning in all types of different ways. They're learning on the job, they're learning in technical training, tutoring contexts that might not always be with the same instructor or training provider. So self-awareness is really important to be able to understand and advocate for what learners need. And you see the two just results on the left are just examples of all the measures that we looked at. 84% said they felt confident in understanding what learning environment supports them best. 79% said they can recognize when to try another strategy if they were faced with a learning challenge. And then on the right of the screen, we're also looking at some measures of confidence and self-efficacy. So here we're asking questions about how likely apprentices would ask for help. And that's a key measure of self-efficacy, because we know when you change that mindset to I can learn, asking for help is actually a learning strength and not a sign of a learning deficit. It means you're engaging in a strategy that's going to support you. We found there was growing confidence in that area as well. So again, just a couple of examples. 74% agreed that they could now advocate for different types of learning materials if they found something challenging. And 84% agreed that they were more likely to ask their instructor for help if they found a topic challenging. And then the final outcome I'll just highlight is in terms of skills gains. So what we did here is we looked at Skill Plan provided data from learning cohorts who didn't go through the support model. So from 2017 to 2022. And then we compared those skills assessments to those that did go through the program cohort. So you can see that those that were in the program cohorts started off at a much lower assessment of essential skills. So reading, writing, math skills. But you can see how they made up that difference and had almost comparable results at the end of their training. So in other words, we actually saw an increased skills gain with the support model that is really, really promising and a powerful kind of testament to if you provide those supports, apprentices are going to acquire the skills and make up any deficits that they might come in with. So I'll pass it back to Teresa, and I can also put in the chat some more findings from our evaluation.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and I will link to the to your report as well. So we'd like to offer you some resources to use in your and implement in your programs as well. And these were used during our program as well. We have the Build Your Skills Learning Hub. Many of our partners here are already using it. This is great for career exploration, benchmarking skills, because we do have assessments in there as well, learning and practice opportunities. We have over 40,000 learners in the system, as well as auditors and teachers and other folks. It includes many of the skilled construction trades. We've also got the transport trades are new, and there's contextualized math for the different trades, as well as science and courses to learn strategies for reading and document use and for math and word problems. So our research, we did user surveys in Build Your Skills, and it shows kind of what we were expecting. 32% of the learners in Build Your Skills have self-indicated that they might have a possible learning difference. So that's, you know, reflective of the research that SRDC has done for us as well. We have other courses. All of this is free. It's covered under federal project funding. There's a course on managing test anxiety, introduction to mentorship, building it green. I'm running out of time, so I'll skip a little bit. The Build Your Skills Learning Hub was developed to be very engaging with videos and animations and practice questions, formative assessment throughout, built with accessibility in mind. There's a reader function, translation, dictionary. So those tools can help the learners interact with the reading material or the learning material in a much more dynamic way, and also help fill in the gaps from, you know, reading on something that's very static. For our leaders, which includes trainers and program partners, we do offer a free course for you. It's with ready-to-use tools. The ones that we developed as part of this project supports professional development resources that you can use to access to implement within your training and in your organizations. So this would be in Build Your Skills in the Leadership Hub. And there's a course called Supporting Learning Differences in the Trades. And I don't know if this video will work. No. Let's see. So it's just scrolling here. There's the Tools Hub there. There's the guide for reviewing assessment results, learning intake questionnaire. All of these tools are available, downloadable, printable. You can adapt them. Any of the tools that you feel fits well with your program. So there's guides to conducting intake interviews, just to reduce the cognitive load on you and your teams as well. And just a reminder, all of the tools are created with adaptability in mind. Just use what you need, and they're downloadable and adaptable with you in mind, as I said. So I'm happy to share this with you and your teams. Welcome to send in any requests to me, Teresa Phillips, or to our skill plan website. There's you can enroll directly into the hub. You can identify yourself as a leader so that you have access to that course. And of course, SRDC has downloads of the executive summary resources and infographics on this project as well. So you can find that at srdc.org in the project library. Somebody had asked if there's a cost to the trainer resource tools. Not at all. Course is free. All of the tools that are developed are free.
Awesome. Great presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions, we're happy to follow up with you later. So thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon.